The Civil Rights Act of 1875 was introduced to Congress by Charles Sumner in 1850 but did not become a law until March 1, 1875. It promised all persons regardless of race, color, or previous condition was entitled to full and equal employment of accommodation. In 1883, Supreme Court declared they did not have the power to regulate this law. Plessy, a black man, sat in an all-white rail car, and when asked to move, he refused. He was arrested and put on trial against John H. Ferguson. The trial really started it all. Plessy first lost, but was overruled later because of the Brown v. Board of Education case. This case proved to pave the way for all blacks. It all started in January 1941. Jim Crow laws were emerging and outraging blacks everywhere. It had already gotten out of hand and was getting worse. They needed to do something about it. Much needed change was starting, and blacks had no idea where this was going, but were ready to fight. They put up a great fight. Thurgood Marshall is connected to the civil rights movement in many ways. You can connect him anywhere. He's famous for being part of the NAACP, but will always be remembered for the Brown v. Board of Education case. Thurgood Marshall has a long list of things he's accomplished. He's more than overqualified. And I mean overqualified. The bus boycott was an effort by Montgomery, Alabama blacks to end the segregation on city buses by boycotting the vehicles. Took place from December 5, 1955 to December 20, 1956, was intended to oppose the city's policy of racial segregation on its public transit system. The struggle lasted roughly a year. Rosa Parks is a seamstress by profession and secretary for the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. The boycott was triggered by her arrest and when she was charged for violating racial segregation laws in Montgomery after refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white man. Finally, the companies gave in and changed the laws so they could make money. Martin Luther King Jr. was born Michael Luther King Jr., but later had his name changed to Martin. Martin Luther attended segregated public schools in Georgia. Graduating from high school at the age of 15, he received a BA degree in 1948 from Morehouse College. Martin Luther King became a pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. In the 11-year period between 1957 and 1968, King traveled over 6 million miles and spoke over 2,500 times, appearing wherever there was injustice, protest, and action. He directed the peaceful march on Washington, D.C. of 250,000 people, to whom he delivered his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." The desegregation of Little Rock schools in Arkansas in 1957 evolved into a major event in the civil rights movement. The desegregation of Little Rock schools began with 1954 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education case, which declared the separate but equal schools were unconstitutional. Malcolm Little was born in Omaha, Nebraska. White people murdered Malcolm's father and forced his mother into a mental hospital. Malcolm's childhood wasn't the best, and he gets into nightlife because people take him for an older gentleman. He spends a life with drugs and older women. He decides to turn his life around through the Nation of Islam. Changed his life drastically. The Nation of Islam, which already converted a number of Malcolm's siblings inspired by the faith, Malcolm stops using drugs, he reads vicariously, prays, studies English and Latin, and joins the prison debate team. He adopts the placeholder X as his last name, using the letter to represent the lost name of his African ancestors. The 1964 Civil Rights Act made racial discrimination in public places such as theaters, restaurants, and hotels illegal. It also required employers to provide equal employment opportunities. Projects involving federal funds could now be cut off if there was evidence of discrimination based on color, race, or national origin. Cesar Estrada Chavez was born March 31, 1927. In 1962, Cesar founded the National Farm Workers Association, later to become the United Farm Workers. They used boycott and picket as their weapons. Cesar was willing to sacrifice his own life so that the Union would continue. He marched all the time and never used violence. Cesar said a fast is first and foremost personal. It is a fast for the purification for my own body, mind, and soul. The fast is also a heartfelt prayer for purification and strengthening for all those who work beside me in the farm worker movement. He used it as a weapon just like Gandhi did, to get his point across and let people know he was serious. 1975, the Voting Rights Act was amended to address the voting rights of language minorities. These provisions were added to the Act based on Congress's determination that voting discrimination against language minorities is pervasive and national in scope. Sections 4 and 203 of the Act apply to jurisdictions with significant numbers of voters with limited or no English proficiency. The Reagan administration comes to power, accelerating the dismantling of most social programs initiated in the 1960s. The Chicanos were finally recognized after being a hidden minority for so long. Someone recognized them and let it be known they were here to stay. Along with other minorities such as Asians, they had worked so long, and it all finally paid off. Democratic leaders had everything to gain and little to lose by supporting gay rights, so they inserted a new plank in the party platform. All groups must be protected from discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, language, age, sex, or sexual orientation. 3 years later, Gary Hart became the first major party presidential candidate to address the LGBT organization. The question of same-sex marriage in religious churches finally was answered. No one in the United States would accept same-sex marriage or address the issue of LGBT. Finally, Hawaii decided to take the issue head-on and take it into their own hands. In 1955, they made same-sex marriage legal in the state of Hawaii. The gays have been working since the 80s to legalize gay marriage, and with Hawaii legalizing it and setting a precedent, other states pretty much said, why not? Other states followed behind, with Prop 8 in California and others going on in other states. Gay marriage has become sort of popular in a sense. Not only have the gays and lesbians fought for equal rights, but the transgender have really stepped up and want rights also. It all started with the slaves, and they paved the way for others today. They stood for what they believed in and fought for it, and eventually overcame it. You can't just believe things will go your way. You have to fight for it, whether it's violent or non-violent, going on strike or being silent, fasting or eating all the food in the world. You have to fight for something. They kept fighting and led us to, well, believe.